My childhood sweetheart said she loved me, but I don't have feelings anymore. Growing up, it was Jessica and me against the world, or at least that's how it felt. She had this wild, contagious laugh, like she wasn't afraid of anything, and her eyes lit up over the smallest stuff. We'd ride bikes until the streetlights came on, sit on her front steps, and talk about everything we wanted to do one day. Travel the world, live by the beach, things like that. She felt like home, if home could be a person. I don't know exactly when I realized I was in love with her, but by 15, it hit me hard. One night, we were sitting in her backyard, wrapped up in an old blanket because the air had gotten chilly. The stars were out, and it was quiet in that way only a small town can be. I turned to her, barely able to breathe, and just said it. "Jess, I think I'm in love with you." The word sounded so much smaller than how I felt. She smiled that soft way she always did and said, "You're my best friend. I don't want to ruin that." I nodded, tried to play it off like it didn't matter. But it did. Still, I told myself to wait, that maybe she'd come around. 3 years went by. We stayed close, kept doing everything together. Weekend hangouts, late-night calls, sharing every dumb meme and every heartbreak. So, at 18, I thought this has to be it. We've grown up. She's got to see it now. I told her again, this time in my car parked at the edge of town after one of those long, rambling drives we loved. I tried to be confident, to show her I was serious. But she just looked at me with that same soft smile and said, "I've been accepted into UCLA. I'm moving to LA." The words hit me like a punch. I didn't see it coming. She went on about needing to find herself, saying she wanted to experience life on her own, no strings. She didn't even say no this time. Just that. I tried to hold it together, nodded, told her I was happy for her, even though my heart felt like it was in a blender. After that night, I stopped waiting. I had no choice. She was already gone, even if she hadn't left yet. It was time to move on, even if it was the last thing I wanted to do. College was supposed to be this big adventure, a fresh start, but honestly, I was just trying to keep my head above water. New classes, new people, and the nagging feeling that I was supposed to be doing something important. I tried to put myself out there, meet people, go to parties, but there was always this weight in the back of my mind. It was Jessica. Even with her 2,000 miles away, I couldn't shake her. Then one day, I ran into Emily, her younger sister. I hadn't seen her in years, not since she was still just Jess's kid sister. She looked different now, grown up. We bumped into each other in the library of all places. I was trying to finish a last-minute paper, and she was there flipping through some thick medical textbook. When I looked up and recognized her, I did a double take. "Emily?" I asked, and she looked up with this surprised smile. "Hey," she said, and that grin of hers was so familiar, but different too. It was softer, maybe warmer. We talked for a bit, laughing about our shared memories of Jess, like how she used to boss us both around. For the first time in a long while, I found myself laughing without forcing it. After that, we started hanging out more. It was casual at first, just coffee here, a study session there. But something about being with Emily felt easy. She didn't bring up Jess, didn't ask questions. It was just her and me, talking about everything under the sun, school stress, life goals, dumb Netflix shows we'd been watching. There was this natural flow to it, like I didn't have to put on a brave face around her. Those quick hangouts with Emily turned into full days. We'd grab coffee in the morning, study together, sometimes end up sharing dinner when we both lost track of time. She'd poke fun at my terrible taste in music, and I'd give her a hard time about being so serious with her studies. She'd roll her eyes, but laugh anyway, a laugh that felt like it was just for me. The more time I spent with her, the more I realized how different she was from Jess. Jessica was wild, impulsive, always chasing something new, always pulling me along for the ride. But Emily was steady. She'd listen without interrupting, give advice that actually made sense, and she had this calming presence that made everything seem doable. One night, after a late study session, we were walking back to her dorm. The campus was quiet, just the two of us under the streetlights, and it felt like the whole world was ours. She was telling me this funny story about a professor who'd mispronounced her last name the entire semester, and I just stopped, right there in the middle of the path, and looked at her. "What?" she asked, a little shy. "I'm really glad we ran into each other again," I said, surprising even myself. She blushed, looked down, and kicked at a loose rock on the path. "Me too," she said, her voice soft. That moment, it felt like there was something unspoken between us. Something we both felt, but weren't quite ready to say out loud. After that night, something shifted. Hanging out with Emily started to feel like the best part of my day. The way she looked at me with those bright, focused eyes, like she actually cared about every little thing I had to say. It was new. I'd catch myself watching her laugh, the way she'd tuck her hair behind her ear, and wonder when this friendship had turned into something more. One Saturday, we decided to take a break from studying and drove out to this small park just outside town. We found a spot under a huge oak tree, stretched out on an old blanket, and just talked. I don't remember what we started talking about, but eventually, she looked up at me with a serious expression and asked, "Are you over her? Over Jess?" The question knocked the wind out of me for a second. I wanted to be honest, but I didn't want to mess up whatever was happening between us. "Yeah," I finally said, because it was the truth. I mean, it hurt like hell, but I don't think she was ever really mine to begin with. I paused, looking over at her. "But you're different. I feel like I can just be myself around you." She didn't say anything right away, just smiled softly and looked out at the park like she was taking it all in. Then she leaned her head on my shoulder, and we sat like that, just watching the sunset. It felt simple and perfect. It felt right. That was the moment I realized I'd fallen for her. It wasn't like with Jessica. With Emily, it was easy. It was like finding the missing piece I didn't know I needed. And in that moment, I knew I wanted to be with her. We didn't rush things after that day. Emily and I kept it low-key, meeting up after classes, cooking late dinners together in my tiny apartment, and spending hours just talking. But every moment felt like it meant something, like this was going somewhere real. One night, we were watching some terrible rom-com on my couch, both of us half asleep. She leaned her head against my shoulder, and without thinking, I kissed the top of her head. She looked up at me, her eyes searching mine, and before I could second-guess myself, I kissed her. It wasn't one of those big, dramatic movie kisses. It was soft, gentle, almost careful, but it felt like everything. She kissed me back, and in that quiet moment, everything just clicked. When we finally pulled back, she had this shy smile. "Guess this makes us something?" "Huh," she teased, trying to keep it light. "Yeah, guess it does," I replied, grinning like an idiot. From that point on, Emily was officially my girlfriend. We kept it to ourselves, partly because we were both still figuring things out, and partly because of Jessica. It felt weird, wrong, even to think about how Jess might take it, but Emily and I agreed it was better to just let things be between us. We weren't hiding it exactly, but we didn't want to make a big deal out of it. The thing was, with Emily, I felt a happiness I'd never felt with anyone else. I didn't feel like I was chasing something or trying to live up to some impossible dream. It was just us, and that was enough. The next couple of years flew by. Emily and I got closer than I thought possible. We had our routines, Saturday morning coffee runs, late-night study sessions, even our random dance-offs in the kitchen when we needed a break. It was like we were building our own little world, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged in it. We'd talk about everything, big and small. She knew all my weird quirks, like how I could never sleep with the closet door open. And I knew hers, like how she hated the sound of clocks ticking. It sounds simple, but it was in those little details that I realized I'd never felt this comfortable with anyone else. One night, after we'd been dating for about a year, we were lying on my couch, her head on my chest, listening to some old records. Out of nowhere, she asked, "Do you ever think about the future? Like where this is going?" I didn't even have to think about it. "Honestly, yeah, I do," I said, my fingers running through her hair. "I want you in it. I mean, I can't imagine it any other way." She looked up at me, eyes searching mine like she was trying to see if I really meant it. "Me too," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but full of that same steady, quiet confidence that made me fall for her in the first place. We didn't make any big promises or plans that night. But from then on, we both knew this wasn't just a phase or some college fling. It was real. And as time went by, the idea of forever with her didn't feel like some big, scary leap. It felt like the most natural thing in the world. 2 years in with Emily, and I knew I didn't just want her in my life. I wanted to build a life with her. It wasn't like some grand revelation, more like something that had been there all along, something quiet and steady that just made sense. It was in the way she'd laugh, and then look over at me to see if I was laughing too. Or the way she'd curl up beside me on the couch, always managing to fit perfectly, like she was made to be there. So I decided to propose. The more I thought about it, the more certain I felt. I knew she wasn't the type for a big public spectacle. No grand gestures in crowded restaurants, no cheesy flash mobs, but something meaningful, something close to home. And then the idea hit me. I'd do it at the family gathering coming up. It was perfect. Both of our families would be there. And in my head, it felt like a way of solidifying everything, of letting everyone know this was real. Besides, our families already loved each other, and Emily and I had joked about how they were practically married already. It just felt right. The ring was a whole journey in itself. I must have gone to a dozen shops, always leaving empty-handed, shaking my head at the glitzy, over-the-top options that just weren't her. Emily was simple, classic, and I wanted the ring to feel like her, something timeless. Eventually, I found it, a thin gold band with a single diamond. Elegant but understated, just like her. When I held it, I knew. This was the one. I spent the next week planning every detail, down to what I'd say and exactly when I'd get down on one knee. The plan was to wait until after dinner, once everyone had relaxed, then take Emily out to the garden behind my parents' house. There's this old oak tree out there, and we'd spent so many lazy afternoons under it, just the two of us, talking about everything and nothing. I thought it'd be the perfect spot. She'd love it. The night before we left, I couldn't sleep. I sat up in bed, holding that small, black velvet box, picturing her reaction 100 different ways. Would she cry? Cover her face with that look of surprised disbelief she had? I smiled to myself, barely able to wait to see it for real. Emily noticed my excitement that week, of course. She kept asking me what was going on, raising an eyebrow every time I'd just shrug and say, "I'm just excited for the weekend." I caught her giving me suspicious glances more than once, and she'd shake her head, probably thinking I was planning something ridiculous, like some surprise weekend date or a prank. I had to bite my tongue not to laugh every time she'd bring it up, keeping my poker face as best as I could. I could already picture the look on her face when she realized this wasn't just a random dinner or a cheesy surprise, but a proposal. So, that was the plan. Our families, a quiet moment in the garden, just me, her, and the ring. It felt perfect, like everything was falling into place exactly the way it was supposed to. All I had to do was wait until the moment was right. What I didn't know was that the plan I'd been putting together so carefully was about to fall apart completely. The day finally came. We drove up to my parents' place, and Emily was in one of those excited, chatty moods, rambling about the new job she'd applied for, a podcast she'd started listening to, little things like that. I was barely holding it together, heart racing just thinking about what was coming. I had the ring box tucked in my jacket pocket, and I kept touching it, reassuring myself it was still there. When we arrived, the house was buzzing. My mom was in the kitchen with Emily's mom, going over a mountain of appetizers, laughing about who brought too much of what. My dad and Emily's dad were outside by the grill, and her brother was already deep into a card game with some cousins. It was chaos, but it was the kind of chaos I loved. Then, out of nowhere, Jessica walked in. I hadn't seen her in what felt like forever, not since she left for LA. She looked different, older, more confident, but also like she was carrying some kind of weight. She gave me a quick smile, a little awkward wave, and before I could even wrap my head around seeing her again, she'd gone over to say hi to everyone else. I felt this pang in my chest, but it wasn't what I used to feel for her. It was more like a quiet, sad nostalgia. Whatever I'd felt back then, it was done. I had Emily, and for the first time, I didn't want anything else. Everything was going according to plan, and the night was playing out exactly like I'd imagined. After dinner, people started drifting off into their little conversations, and I caught Emily's eye, giving her a subtle nod toward the garden. She raised an eyebrow, curious, but got up and followed me. As we made our way to the oak tree, I took a deep breath, getting ready to say the words I'd been practicing in my head for weeks. But before I could even begin, we heard someone behind us. I turned around, and there was Jessica, standing on the patio, staring at us. Her face was flushed, and she looked intense. She took a shaky breath, and with everyone's eyes now on her, she blurted out, "I can't keep this in anymore." I realized I'm in love with you." The words hung there like a bad dream. Emily's hand went cold in mine, her face paling as she looked from me to Jessica, trying to process what was happening. Meanwhile, my mind was racing, trying to make sense of why now? I managed to find my voice, though it sounded strange to my own ears. "Jessica, what are you talking about?" I said, barely holding back the frustration in my voice. She looked at me, eyes wide and desperate. I thought I needed time to find myself, to be away, but it was you, always you. And now I can't ignore it. My stomach twisted. This wasn't just blindsiding. It felt like she was ripping open a wound I'd spent years closing. I glanced at Emily, whose face was tight, hurt, and utterly silent. She dropped my hand, stepping back slightly, looking as though the ground had just disappeared beneath her feet. I shook my head, taking a step toward Jessica. "You had years to figure that out, Jess. I moved on, and I'm with Emily. I love her." Jessica's face fell, but she looked like she was fighting back tears, like she couldn't believe this was happening. It was then I noticed everyone around us, our families all staring, some looking shocked, others, like my mom, with expressions that I couldn't even place. My mom broke the silence, saying, "Well, sweetheart, it was only a matter of time, wasn't it?" She looked at me, almost expectant, like she was waiting for me to tell Emily to step aside, as if my relationship with Jessica had just been on pause. I felt like I was being suffocated. All those years, I'd chased Jessica, held on to some hope that she'd want me back. But now it just felt like some kind of cruel joke, a setup where everyone had been waiting for me to go back to Jessica. And the worst part was that no one, not my mom, not her parents, seemed to care that I was standing there with a ring I'd bought for Emily, that it was her I wanted. I took a deep breath, forcing the words out, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I don't know what you all thought was happening here, but I'm not going back to Jessica. I'm with Emily. I love her, and I brought her here tonight to propose." It was like a bomb went off. Jessica's face crumpled, and before anyone could say a word, she turned and ran off into the house, disappearing down the hallway. I felt my stomach twist with a mix of anger and frustration as I turned to Emily, who was just standing there, looking hurt and betrayed by everyone, by me, by my family, by hers. She managed a weak smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Let's get out of here," she whispered. And with that, we left, walking away from the mess, from our family's looks, from everything. It felt like the only thing that made sense in that moment was her and me, and the future we'd have to fight for. Emily and I drove back in silence, her gaze fixed out the window, and I could feel the tension between us. I kept my grip tight on the wheel, replaying Jessica's words over and over, the stunned faces of our families, and the ring I'd never even had the chance to pull out. My mind was racing, but all I wanted was to talk to Emily, to explain. But every time I glanced at her, she seemed so distant, like she was trying to pull away even though she was sitting right next to me. When we finally reached her apartment, she sighed, looking down at her hands for a second before turning to me. "Look, I'm going to need some time. Tonight was a lot." Her voice was calm, but there was an edge of hurt there that cut deep. I reached out, desperate to reassure her. I didn't know Jessica was going to say any of that. I swear this whole thing blindsided me too." She shook her head, giving a weak smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's not just about Jessica, okay? It's everyone. Your mom, my parents, all of them just standing there expecting you to pick her." She paused, her voice breaking a bit. I thought we were on the same page, but it felt like everyone else already wrote a different story for us. Her words hit me harder than I expected. She was right. Our family's reactions had felt like some kind of unspoken betrayal, as if they'd all been waiting for me to go back to Jessica, like Emily was just a placeholder. It was beyond infuriating, and it felt like a reminder that I'd spent years tied to Jessica, in ways I hadn't even realized. "Emily, please," I said, my voice quieter now. "You're the one I want. I love you, and I don't care what they think." She hesitated, searching my face, but there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes that cut me to the core. "Then why did they all act like this was just temporary? Like you've been waiting for her?" She took a shaky breath. "I can't help but wonder if a part of you, if you ever thought she'd come back." I opened my mouth to protest, to tell her that wasn't true, that I'd been done with Jessica for years, but Emily just held up her hand. Look, I'm exhausted. Let's talk about this tomorrow, okay? Yeah, I said, nodding. Even though the idea of waiting, of having this unresolved, tore at me. She got out of the car, and I watched her walk into her building, her shoulders slumped in a way that I'd never seen before. The next morning, I woke up to a series of missed calls and texts. My mom, my dad, even Jessica's mom. The whole thing felt surreal, like a bad dream that I couldn't shake off. I ignored the messages, threw on some clothes, and went straight to Emily's place. She opened the door, looking like she hadn't slept, her eyes red-rimmed but resolute. We sat down in her living room, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, she looked at me, crossing her arms. So, what now? I don't care what anyone else thinks, I said, my voice firm. I'm not letting them or Jessica ruin what we have. This is us. Just us. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. It's not that simple, though, is it? We're talking about our families. This isn't just drama that goes away if we ignore it. She took a deep breath, clearly struggling to hold back the hurt. Your mom, my parents, they didn't even try to stand up for us last night. They just sat there. I felt a surge of anger at the memory. I'll talk to them. To all of them. I'll make it clear that this isn't just some passing thing for me, that I'm with you, and they'll have to deal with it, or they can stay out of my life. Emily's expression softened a bit, and she nodded slowly. I just don't want to be caught in some twisted tug-of-war between you and them. You won't be, I said, reaching out to take her hand, relieved when she let me. I won't let them treat you like this. I'm done with whatever fantasy they had in their heads about Jessica. That's over. We sat there quietly, holding hands, letting the tension settle a little. I could tell we both felt raw, like we were still processing everything, but there was something steady between us, a shared determination to get through it. The first call I made after leaving Emily's was to my mom. She answered on the second ring, her voice tense, but overly cheerful. Well, finally. We were all worried after you two just stormed off last night. I clenched my jaw, fighting to keep my tone steady. Mom, what happened last night was a mess, and I'm not okay with how you and everyone else acted. Emily's my girlfriend, and I'm with her because I love her. Whatever feelings you had about Jessica, they need to stop. There was silence on the other end before she spoke, sounding almost annoyed. Sweetheart, I just thought maybe you hadn't given her a real chance. You and Jessica had something special for years, and now she's back. No, Mom. I cut in, my voice sharper than I intended. That was years ago, and she left. I've moved on. We've moved on. If you can't respect that, then maybe you don't need to be involved. She let out a small, exasperated sigh. All right, I hear you. But it all happened so suddenly. You can't expect us to understand when she's always been part of our family. Then you'll have to try, I replied, voice cold. Because if this happens again, Emily and I won't be around. I ended the call, my hands shaking, and texted Emily right away, letting her know I'd talked to my mom. She responded with a simple, thank you. And it was the first time since the night before that I felt like things might be okay. But deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. We had our work cut out for us, facing our families and everything they expected, everything they thought they knew about us. And if it came down to it, I'd walk away from all of them for her, no questions asked. For a couple of days, things were quiet. Emily and I tried to move forward, going back to our routines, talking things through in the evenings, finding our way back to what felt normal. But under it all, there was this lingering tension, like we both knew we hadn't dealt with everything yet. Then one evening, as I was about to head over to Emily's place, I got a message from Jessica. Can we talk? I owe you an apology. I stared at the message for a long time, torn between ignoring her and giving her a chance to explain. Finally, I texted her back, telling her to meet me at a coffee shop nearby. I wasn't about to bring her into the space Emily and I were rebuilding, but I needed to clear the air. When I got to the coffee shop, Jessica was already there, fidgeting with her coffee cup, looking more nervous than I'd ever seen her. She looked up when I walked in, her expression uncertain, almost regretful. Hey, she said softly, standing up and pulling me into an awkward hug. I stepped back, giving her a nod as I sat down across from her, keeping my expression neutral. So, You wanted to talk? I prompted, trying to keep my tone steady. She took a deep breath, her gaze dropping to the table. Yeah, I messed up, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't realize how selfish it was to do that, to just throw all of that out there in front of everyone. I don't know what I was thinking. I folded my arms, watching her carefully. Well, it's good you're owning up to it now, but it doesn't change what happened. Emily and I are still dealing with the fallout. Our families. I know, she cut in quickly, her eyes glistening. I know I messed things up for you too. I was stupid. And I guess I thought it would be like old times. Like, I'd just come back, and maybe you'd feel the same. It's so dumb, I know, but I didn't expect you to actually move on. I took a deep breath, letting her words sink in. Jess, you had years. I tried. I tried twice. And both times, you walked away. Emily, she's been there for me. I love her, and I don't want anything getting in the way of that. Jessica nodded, her expression tight. I get that now, she said, wiping at her eyes. It's just it hit me, seeing you with her. It felt like I lost something I didn't know I needed. She looked up, meeting my eyes with a sad smile. But I guess it was never mine to lose, was it? I didn't answer right away. Just let the silence stretch between us as the weight of her words settled. She was right. Whatever had happened between us back then, whatever feelings had been there, they didn't belong to her anymore. They didn't even belong to me. Finally, I nodded. I appreciate you saying this, but I need you to understand, Emily and I are serious. I'm not about to lose her over a misunderstanding. Jessica gave a small nod, looking away. I know. I won't get in the way anymore. I'm sorry, that's all. With that, I stood up, feeling both relieved and strangely exhausted. Thank you, I said simply, then turned and walked out without looking back. It felt like closing a door I'd been waiting years to shut, and as I walked away, I felt a strange sense of peace. Whatever hold Jessica had over me before, it was gone. I went straight to Emily's place afterward. When she opened the door, she took one look at me and raised an eyebrow. You okay? She asked, sensing something was different. I nodded, pulling her close and letting out a long breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Yeah, I said, my voice steady. I just had a talk with Jessica. It's over for real this time. Emily studied my face, searching for any hint of hesitation, then nodded, her hand squeezing mine. Good, she said, smiling softly, because I want us to really move forward. Just you and me. And with that, I felt like we'd finally turned a corner. It was no longer about the past or Jessica or our family's expectations. It was just us rebuilding on our own terms, and for the first time, I felt completely free to look toward the future with her. Things with Emily felt lighter after that talk with Jessica. There was a new kind of ease between us, like a weight had been lifted. We'd go for long walks, talk about the future, and plan all these little things, from what city we'd want to settle down in to the kind of place we'd live in. But as much as things had improved between us, there was still one part that hadn't been dealt with: our families. Emily hadn't talked much with her parents since the night of the gathering. She'd mentioned her mom had called a few times, but she'd ignored it, too hurt and angry to face the way her own family had just stood there, watching Jessica throw a wrench into our lives without a word in support. I knew it bothered her more than she let on, and I couldn't blame her. My own mom hadn't exactly done much to stand up for Emily either, and that ate at me. So, I decided it was time to lay it all out. I asked Emily to come over for dinner, and afterward, we talked to my parents together. She was hesitant at first, but finally, she agreed, knowing we couldn't just avoid them forever. We needed them to understand, and if they didn't, well, then we needed to know that too. The night of the dinner, my mom acted like everything was normal, chatting away as she served food, oblivious, or maybe just pretending, to the tension simmering between us. My dad was quieter, glancing between Emily and me, probably sensing something was up. When we finished eating, I cleared my throat and looked at my mom directly. Mom, we need to talk about what happened at the gathering, I said, trying to keep my tone calm. She paused, her smile faltering. Honey, it was just a bit of drama. Families go through these things. Jessica isn't the issue here, I interrupted, taking Emily's hand under the table. You all acted like I was supposed to drop everything with Emily just because Jessica decided she wanted something that ended years ago. Do you understand how hurtful that was? To both of us? My mom's face softened, but she shook her head. I just thought you two had so much history. I didn't mean to hurt anyone, but it felt like maybe you hadn't really closed that chapter yet. I could feel Emily tense beside me, and I tightened my grip on her hand, steadying both of us. Mom, that chapter closed a long time ago. I love Emily, and that's what you need to accept. If you can't, then maybe we won't be around as much. I'm not going to keep her in a place where she doesn't feel welcome. The words came out stronger than I'd planned, and I felt Emily glance at me, a small smile playing on her lips. I wasn't doing this just for her, though. I needed my family to understand that they didn't get to control who I loved. My mom looked hurt, her eyes widening. You'd really just cut us off over this? It's not about cutting anyone off, Mom, I said, softer now but firm. It's about respect. Respecting that Emily is the one I chose. And you need to let go of whatever idea you had about Jessica and me. If you can do that, then we can all move forward. But if not, I trailed off, letting the silence speak for itself. My dad cleared his throat, finally stepping in. Look, if that's what you want, then that's what we'll support, he said, giving my mom a meaningful look. Emily's been good to you, and that's all that matters to us. He looked at Emily then, his voice gentle. We're sorry if we made you feel anything less than welcome. That wasn't our intention. Emily nodded, her voice quiet but steady. Thank you. That means a lot to me. My mom sat there, looking down at her plate, and finally nodded too. If she makes you happy, then that's all I need to know. I'll try to put it behind me. I just want what's best for you. I felt a wave of relief, the kind that comes after carrying around too much weight for too long. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. They'd heard us, and for now, that was all I needed. After we left, Emily turned to me as we walked to the car, her expression softer, more relaxed than I'd seen in days. Thank you for standing up for me, she said, slipping her hand into mine. I pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. I'm always going to stand up for you. You're my future, Emily. I'm done letting the past get in the way. As we drove back to her place, I felt a new kind of peace settle between us. The boundaries had been set, and for the first time in what felt like ages, it was just Emily and me, facing forward together, ready to move on from all the chaos. After that conversation with my parents, things actually started to feel right. The weight of all the past drama and lingering family expectations had lifted, and I could finally see the future with Emily clearly. It wasn't about what anyone else thought or expected. It was just about us building something that felt real and solid. Over the next few weeks, Emily and I settled back into our rhythm. It was comforting, almost like we'd hit a reset button. But now, everything felt deeper, stronger. Even the little things like cooking dinner together in her tiny kitchen or sharing coffee on lazy Sunday mornings felt like they meant more. One night, I found myself looking at her across the table as she rambled on about something at work, and I realized I'd been holding on to that ring, still waiting for the perfect moment. I hadn't gotten to propose the way I planned, but it didn't matter anymore. All that mattered was making it official, starting our life together without waiting for some grand setup. I didn't want any more surprises or interruptions, just us in our own way. So, on a quiet Friday night, while she was curled up on the couch, reading, I sat down beside her and took her hand. She looked up surprised, her face soft and open. Emily, I started, my heart pounding, but I knew this time was right. I wanted this to be big, but honestly, I think it's better just like this. Just us. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the ring, and held it up. I love you, and I want to spend my life with you. Will you marry me? Her eyes went wide, her hand covering her mouth, but there was no hesitation. She nodded, her voice catching as she whispered, yes. Absolutely yes. I slid the ring onto her finger, and we both just sat there for a moment, letting it sink in. She leaned in, wrapped her arms around my neck, and kissed me, slow and deep, like she was pouring all the love and everything we'd gone through into that one moment. When we pulled back, she looked down at the ring, smiling. I can't believe this is actually happening. Neither can I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. It's been a long time coming. The next day, we called our families, letting them know the news on our terms this time. My mom was thrilled. All hints of the past finally behind us, and Emily's parents surprised us by being genuinely supportive, maybe realizing what they almost lost. It wasn't a huge announcement or a grand gesture, but it didn't need to be. It was just us telling the world that this was forever. Over the following months, we started planning our wedding, keeping it small and intimate, just close friends and family. It wasn't about the show, it was about the commitment, the life we were building together, and the peace we'd finally found. On our wedding day, under a clear sky and surrounded by the people who mattered most, I saw Emily walking down the aisle toward me, looking more beautiful and radiant than I'd ever seen her. And I knew, as we exchanged our vows, that every challenge, every moment of doubt had led us to this. There was no more Jessica, no more family interference, no more old ghosts hanging around. It was just us, and that's all I ever wanted.